Hello, this is Frank Melton. I'm going to start a new YouTube channel called Grow Plants. My name is Frank Melton. I have an MS in horticulture and about 40 years experience in horticulture and growing plants, plus some farm experience when I was growing up. I'm going to do a video this morning called Using Native Plants in Landscapes. And a native plant is one that was here when the settlers first came here, when the explorers first came here, the Spanish who came to this area, uh, plants that were here at that time. To start a native plant landscape, first of all, you need to analyze your site. The opposite thing to do that a lot of people do is go and choose plants and then they just put them in the landscape wherever they want to. But what you need to do is analyze your site first and test your soil for pH and nutrients, and you can do that at the county extension office. Test irrigation water if it's from a well, because it can be too high in salts or pH. And check your drainage and your sunlight and your wind exposure. Know your soil. The soil testing, this has to be done by taking cores of soil. You can do it with a core or a shovel or a trowel or whatever, but just take a slice through the soil, the top 6 inches, 8 or 10 places around an area you want to test, and mix them together, and then dry them out on a piece of paper, and then take them to the extension office to send off to be tested. Now, the pH testing as well as levels of macro and micronutrients. If it's your first test for that area, test for everything you can test for, and then install plants that will grow in your soil. Now, the circling roots have to be cut when you put plants in. Otherwise, they'll keep growing in circles even though they have plenty of room to grow. But cut the roots on the outer layer of the root ball and on the bottom and the sides, and spread the roots out just a little bit. When you put in the plants, look up for wires and lights first. Just be sure you don't plant them under power lines if they're going to be small, large plants, large tall plants. You dig a shallow and wide hole, and would be good if the hole was even wider than this one shows. You find the top root that comes off of the trunk, and that root should be near the top of the soil. Now sometimes you'll have roots that grow up from the bottom. It look like it's the place to plant them, but what you need to do is, if you don't see the root on the top of the soil that comes out from the trunk, you need to find that root and plant that one just about the top of the ground. You want to find the right plant for the right place, and that's what we talked about with the analyzing your site. You want to check the pH and the fertilizer, and then if you have unadapted plants, you'll get weak growth and nutritional problems and pests, and you'll have a problem with the plants, and you'll be sorry you did it that way. Plant growth in the southeast, the highest temperatures are in May to September, and the danger of frost is usually passed by the end of April. Therefore, the end of April is an ideal time to divide and install mini plants depending on the flowering times. You don't want to plant something that's flowering while it's flowering. They'll have a growing season to grow though, and then it'll have to grow larger before the first frost in mid-October, and it can take the frost better. Cool season grasses should be divided the first part of April, and warm season grasses toward the end of April, or maybe even May if the weather's different. Wildflowers of North Alabama is a good choice. I'm in Alabama, so I looked up references for Alabama, but you can look up similar references for your state. Some other good ones are the Gardening with Native Plants of Tennessee is a good resource for this area. She looks at the plants from the area of the soil, and that's the good way to look at where to put plants. Wildflowers of Tennessee, the Ohio Valley, and the Southern Appalachians by Horn and Cathcart is also another good reference for this area. Gardening for the Birds by Tom Barnes, University of Kentucky Press. A plant atlas. Now, each state should have a plant atlas, and so you could look up the atlas for your state. And that will have plants that have been sent into different herbariums, and sometimes it's a source that from people that have gone out and photographed native plants and found them in the wild, and that's a good resource for your area. Bugwood.org is a good resource from University of Georgia with good pictures of plants and insects and diseases, and also invasive plants. Now, you don't want to put in invasive plants because that'll crowd out the native plants, and what we're trying to do is establish native plants in our landscapes because we're getting a lot of them destroyed in our development. This is a picture of my backyard. Now, I had all native plants, and most of them were from the area that I lived in called the Pennyrile area. There's a red cedar in the back corner, and I'll have closer up pictures of these plants later, but this is a narrow-leaf sunflower, and there's a lot of good, I'll have closer pictures later. Now, this area on the right by the fence is a higher area in elevation. Now, this is tall coreopsis along the fence here with the tall yellow flowers, and they bloom for quite a while. They bloom for a month or two. And then this is a big blue stem here, and then I have some, now this is little blue stem along this trail here, and I've planted them in a kind of a curved way and put bark mulch down on the pathway. Now, these bare areas on the right and the left, I put some clover in there, a native clover called buffalo clover in later on. And this is I'll have closer up pictures of most of these plants later, but this is a cup plant, it's a silphium. This one is a vernal witch hazel, and that's one of the first plants to bloom in the spring. And this shows someone sitting on the bench I had there. He was from a group of AARP that came out to visit, and then also had a couple of classes from the horticulture department at Western Kentucky University that came out and visited, and a couple of garden clubs and master gardeners came out and visited. And I became a master gardener in Kentucky and later in Georgia and Alabama. This is St. John's wort. Now, this shows to some degree how you can trim plants to be wider at the bottom and narrower at the top, and they bloom a lot better overall. And you get a lot more bloom from the plants that way. And they just show off better. Now, this is euonymus, or strawberry bush. Now, this plant is, I wanted to show, this is not a good plant right here, but I wanted to show the capsule that holds the fruit. And it looks like a strawberry when it's closed, and that's why I wanted to show this, and it's called strawberry bush too. This orange fruit are inside the capsule, and then there's a white seed inside the orange fruit. And I've grown this from cuttings and from seed, and you have to take this white seed out of the fruit or the fruit will inhibit the germination of the seed. This is another picture of the strawberry bush, and this one, it shows it's very more closed, and the leaves are a little bit pale green, but I've had them in a better situation in another house, and it looks really nice. It was trimmed kind of a pyramidal shape, and it had bloom all over it, and then these fruit capsules all over it. This is iron bark. There's one bloom there, and then I'll show you another picture. That's a close-up of a bloom. And then this shows how I've trimmed this plant to be wider at the bottom and narrower at the top, and you see how it's got bloom all over it. So native plants can look really nice if you just do a very slight amount of trimming. Now this is elderberry. This has really grown tall. It has, here you see the white bloom right here. These grow in roadsides quite a bit all over the southeast, and it's one that's used for medicinal purposes too. Some recommend elderberry for flu symptoms. That's not from my recommendation, but I'm just saying that's what some people do. This is blue vervain. This is the milkweed. This is the common the milkweed that attracts the monarch butterflies, and I've trimmed it a little bit too, and you can see how it's just covered with bloom. And if I'm not there taking a picture, there's monarch butterflies really love this plant. This is the wild hydrangea, and this plant will grow out of rock on a cliff. And this is this also will grow in woods, edge of woods. These wider flowers around the outside edge are male flowers, and the ones in the middle are female flowers. And there's another picture, close up of the shrub that I've trimmed. Here again, wider at the bottom, and it just blooms all over. It won't bloom that nice in the wild and coming out of a rock cliff, but that's from my yard. And by the way, I did test my soil, and I fertilized according to the soil test before I planted anything, and I haven't fertilized since then. That's been about 4 or 5 years ago. Now you might want to test every few years, 2 or 3 years. It might be a better way to do it, but I didn't feel that these were needing any more fertilizer. They just looked very healthy. This is the pad cactus that's a native to this southeast area, and here again it has a very pretty bloom. There's a close up there, and that just shows how it looks. It's really pretty, I think, even though you get thorns and it's hard to weed around. This is sedum. Now I got this from a blacktop area, old blacktop area that was crumbling on the edges, and it was growing in through those cracks. And I just got one little start from it, and after a couple of years, this had grown all this area, this big. And this is a rock that I put in here. I did this to make it look more like a glade or a high dry area. This is blue-eyed grass. Now this will grow in old fields or old lots where there's no houses, and it also grows on a roadside. This is dwarf crested iris. Now it'll grow on a roadside or on hillsides. It'll take dry areas, and it has a really pretty bloom. This is black-eyed Susan. Now this grass in the background here is Virginia wild rye. Virginia wild rye. And I'll see if I have another picture later. But I took this black-eyed Susan from a place where they were clearing land to put houses in and just tearing them out. And so I got a few of them and put them in my yard. Now this is one that I started as a small plant, and you can see how this one is really put on the bloom. It really puts on a show. This is cup plant. Now cup plant is a silphium genus, and it grows over quite an area of the southeast and probably other areas too. But you see how these leaves come together around the stem, and they hold water when it rains, and so the birds like this plant because they can come to it and get water out of those cups when it's really dry. This is the Monarda. This is the lavender Monarda. This is Liatris, and this is in the dry area again. Now Liatris is hard to tell apart, but I have several different species of Liatris here, and it's growing with some grass here that's side oats grandma grass. This is echinacea, and this is the glade coneflower. You notice how the bracts go down, but the goldfinch really love this plant, and they will grow from seed. I grew these from seed. This is the side oats grandma grass. The seed kind of come off of one side. That's why they call it side oats grandma grass. Now this is a pretty good root system on this plant, and it does spread some from the sides and puts out new shoots and spreads as a clump. This is the New England aster, and this is one big plant, but you see how much bloom it can put out if you have the fertility correct according to the soil test, and if you trim it just a little bit to keep it wider at the bottom, it'll have a big group of flowers that really show. Now this is narrow leaf sunflower, and I have another picture here probably about a year later, and it really puts on a show too of all those bloom all over it. And this plant on the right here is a rough leaf dogwood. Has the white grayish color on the bottom of the leaves, and it's green on top. That's a shrub that is a native to their area, and it grows on roadsides quite a bit. This is blue lettuce. Blue lettuce is it's actually Florida blue lettuce, even though it's not. That meant it probably was first named in Florida. This is the white milkweed. Now it's not very common, and doesn't grow real fast like the other. Well, doesn't grow as fast as the other milkweed. That was a passion flower, and passion flower is a good source for the larvae of the Gulf fritillary caterpillar. This is a boneset. Now boneset grows in a little bit moist areas. This is in a mesic part of my yard, and I've trimmed it to be full of bloom like that. This is crossvine, and it has those yellow flowers and with a kind of a bronze center. And then this is the pinkish color or what in the outside. And crossvine is I got this off of the fence row on the roadside. This is bear's foot. Now bear's foot has these big yellow flowers and large leaves, and this grows this much in 1 year. It freezes down every year and then grows back this much in 1 year. This is penstemon, and in the background is the monarda. You can see how it has come up from the roots and spread some. All these plants were put in as very small plants. This is lizard's tail. This is the one that grows, and we're getting into the moist area here. And you see how it looks like a lizard's tail. And these leaves are kind of heart-shaped, these right in here on the upper right. On the lower left is a red-stemmed dogwood. And the stems get red in the wintertime when it loses its leaves. And the flower is kind of like this right here. That's like the rough-stemmed dogwood. A rough leaf dogwood also has a flower like that. This is Joe Pye weed. This is in a moist area. Now, these are the leaves of the Joe Pye weed, and this is a leaf of a sambucus or elderberry. Now this is a marsh milkweed, and here again I've trimmed this one to be wider at the bottom, and you see how many bloom are all over this plant. The picture doesn't do it justice, but it has a lot of bloom all over it, and the butterflies really like this one too. Now this is buttonbush. Buttonbush has these really glossy green leaves and red stems and these white globular flowers in the fall. It likes moist areas too, and I've even seen it growing where it's flooded sometimes of year. This is Virginia willow that grows in the edge of wetlands. This is pickerel weed, and this grows in up to a couple of feet of water, but you plant it in um, a foot or less of water and just let it grow and spread out into the deeper water. And it usually grows where the water is low in the wintertime and it floods in the summertime. Now this is a hibiscus moschutus. It's a native hibiscus, and it grows in wet areas. These are common arrowheads. They have these. You see how the leaf looks? It's right here and here. This is cardinal flower. You see, here's the red flower here. Now on the lower left, you see these little green balls. Now those are seed of one of those common arrowhead. And the male flowers are on the top and the female flowers on the bottom so that they'll be fertilized. And I've grown them from seed, and I've grown them from the bulbs or the rhizomes from underground. This is the front of my yard, and I had some native plants in here too, but these were some that were, and some that were not native, that I bought from a nursery that said they were native, but they weren't. And that's one thing you really have to watch. This plant on this trellis is a wisteria, and it's not the Chinese or Japanese wisteria, but it's a wisteria that doesn't grow as fast as some of the others. And I had another native wisteria in the back that was just not much of a show, but it was on a trellis in the very back, and it was one that's native to Kentucky. And this is the other side of my front yard, and this tree in the front corner is a winged elm, and that is really pretty in the wintertime. And then some of these flowers are black-eyed Susans here in the front.